Hello, everyone, and welcome. Good afternoon. I should say welcome to this session of the HUD CARES Act Virtual Training Conference 2022. This is one of two sessions discussing the use of IDIS for CDBG-CV grantees. This first session will discuss activity setup and reporting for CDBG-CV grantees. Thank you. The second session later this afternoon at 4:00 p.m. Eastern, we'll discuss the CAPER for CDBG-CV grantees. And we'll have a break between the two sessions. So if you step away, we end a little early, please do come back for the second session at 4 p.m. Eastern. My name is Rob Srantz. I'm with the Cloudburst Group. I'm glad to be here with two of my colleagues, Susan Walsh. Hi, Susan.
Hi, everyone.
And Laura Dietert. Hi, Laura.
Welcome.
We are also expecting to be joined today by staff from HUD's Office of Block Grants Assistance, Puping Wong.
Hi, good afternoon.
Hi, Puping. And working behind the scenes is our host and event host from the CITEM group. Thanks, guys. We have two major objectives for today's session. One is that you will understand how to set up common CDBG activities and set up CDBG activities that respond to coronavirus. And two, that you will know how to use CDBG-CV, the CDBG-CV version of the PR26 report, and how to report CDBG-CV grants in the cash on hand reports. So on to our agenda. First, we're talking through activity setup in IDIS, then the PR26 report, the cash on hand report, some helpful resources, and at the very end, we'll take some questions from you. On to housekeeping. Before we start, I would like to review a few things. This webinar is scheduled to end at 3:45 p.m. Eastern time, but we anticipate it will end earlier. We just don't quite have that much content. If you need to step away and come, that's fine. It will be recorded, but please do come back for a 4 p.m. session on the CAPER and CDBG-CV. Let's see also the slides, transcript, and recording will be posted on HUD Exchange. Usually that's about 2 to 3 weeks after the session. Takes a bit to get them approved, so thanks for your patience. You are all in listen-only mode and will be in listen-only for the duration of the session. Oh, and also note that you can, there's live captions happening, so you can toggle that on and off if you'd like. And also you should have received an attendee guide that has a lot more information about how to use this platform. I imagine many of you have been using it for the last day and a half. Let's see, to questions. Yes, we have time at the end of this presentation to answer your questions and hope to answer as many as we can. Please use the Q&A feature that you see there down below if you're in the web page. If you've opened Slido, which I'll talk about in a second, in a separate window, you can enter them there. Please enter them as you have them. We'll gather them, collect them, and answer those that we can. If we're not able to get to your question today, please take advantage of the HUD Exchange IDIS Ask a Question. Okay, now a bit about chat. If you're having, I see many of you saying hello. That's wonderful. We appreciate that. Welcome. If you're having any technical difficulties, use the chat, and our hosts are watching that, so they can help you out there. You can also email to eventsupport@citemgroup.com. We ask that you do not use the chat for questions to the presenters or to myself. We won't be watching it. We're going to use the Q&A so we can log those questions and which ones we've answered and which ones we haven't. All right, one last slide, I promise. If you do want to view and participate in the Q&A in a separate window or on a mobile device, navigate to slide.do in a new browser window or install the Slido app on your mobile device. You can find the Slido code at the bottom of the page in the session description. And also there should be an announcement that I made in Q&A that has the session code. So at this point, I will turn it over to Susan. Susan, you're up, correct?
Yes, thanks,
All right.
Rob.
You bet.
Okay, well, welcome everyone. And we thought we'd start out with a reminder because we get a lot of questions through the Ask a Question for IDIS about people losing access. And we really wouldn't want that to happen to you. So we want to just give you a quick reminder that HUD does do a purge of user IDs that are not used within 90 days. And so we really recommend you access IDIS on a regular basis, even if you don't normally use it every day. We just recommend at least once or twice a month just to keep it in your mind and forefront. And that way you're not going to get into an access issue. If you do have to request your access, then there is a form that you can get on the HUD Exchange. And you do have to have it notarized, although that can be done digitally now. And it does take a little bit of time. So that's why we want to make sure that you keep your access if you can. So we'll just get right into it. And we're not going to go through every single step of setting up an activity, but we want to focus on the most important things. And so this is a screenshot from IDIS, and it shows on the activity screen where you add an activity. And so for CDBG-CV, that's where you're going to go. So this slide shows you just the relationship between your action plan, your project, and your activity. And so we just want to give you a reminder that the CARES Act amendment, which you may have done to your 19 action plan, or you may have done it to your 2020 action plan, but whichever one had the amendment, that will hold your projects, your CV projects, and those are the projects you're going to select. In a minute, we're going to show you that screen, but that's where you're going to find your projects for your CV activities. And so we just wanted to show you that relationship right there. So when you go to your setup to add an activity, one of the first things you select is the project, and that's highlighted on the screen that you see right now. So you're going to click on that, which will bring you to a search screen. And we're not going to show you the search screen, but that's where you're going to show or you're going to search for the project that you want to associate this activity with. And so those projects may be in your, they may be listed as 2019, they may be listed as 2020. And one thing that's a little confusing is that you may have amended your 2019 action plan for your CARES amendment, but your actual projects for CV may be actually in 2020 year. And so sometimes it might be a little easier to search by the project name, or you can do it by the year. But just remember that even if you amended your 19 action plan, the project itself may be under the 2020 year. So just a little reminder about that. And also just wanted to mention too that it's very easy to fix a project or fix the activity project. So if you find later on that you set up your activity under the wrong project, it's very easy to fix that. So don't worry too much about that. So here's one of the main questions that it's very important to make sure you do correctly. And this is the question that says, is this activity to prevent, prepare for, or respond to coronavirus? So you have to answer this yes, if you are going to be funding this activity with CV funds. And if you're actually doing a regular CDBG activity, not funded with CV funds, but this activity is in response to coronavirus, then you also want to select yes for this question. And that's very important, as we're going to show you a little bit later. It helps categorize it, and it's important for certain reports. So it's very important to answer this question correctly. Don't get it confused with the question underneath. That's for Section 108 loans. You don't want to mess with that. But just this particular question is very important to select for coronavirus. So I mentioned that you may want to answer that as yes if you're using regular CDBG money, but the activity itself is in response to coronavirus. And so one thing is that if you're using fiscal year 2019 or fiscal year 2020 CDBG grant funds, those funds are exempt from the public service cap if they're used in an activity that is answered yes for coronavirus, in response to coronavirus. So it's optional to use earlier money like 17, 18, whatever you happen to have. It's also optional to be using 2021 money or later, but you won't get that exemption, that waiver from the public service cap. But if you are doing a regular funded CDBG activity in response to coronavirus and you're using 19 and or 2020 funds, regular CDBG funds, make sure, and it is answered as yes, then that will be waived from the public service cap. The other thing we want to mention is not to mix coronavirus response activities with non-coronavirus activities. So in other words, the question is this activity to prevent, prepare for, and respond to coronavirus? That means the entire activity. All the funding in this activity must be to respond to coronavirus. If it's not, you need to have separate activities, because when you categorize the activity as yes, you're saying that all the funds in this activity are in response to coronavirus. We're going to mention a little bit later, it's okay to fund an activity with both CDBG-CV and regular CDBG, but only again, if all that CDBG money is in response to coronavirus. But definitely if you're just funding with regular CDBG and some of that money is not being used for a response to coronavirus, you don't want to have those funds in the same activity. So one of the most important things, or one of the very important things that you'll be selecting on this main activity setup screen is your matrix code. We're giving you an example here. We highlighted the 05Q, but in the matrix code selection, there's a little drop down, and that gives you the whole list of all the different matrix codes that are available to you. And we're going to show you in a little bit later. Well, actually on this slide, we're going to show you the Appendix A of the IDIS for CDBG Entitlement Communities Training Manual has the entire list of the matrix codes. And there's also some other appendices right after that that show you other information and very helpful. So if you have any questions about what the proper matrix code is, you can look at the manual and then talk to your HUD field office if you have additional questions about that. But you do want to use the most specific code that you can, and you want to make sure it is accurate for that activity. And finally, for my section, just wanted to mention section 3. This is also still on the main activity screen. There is that new question that you've seen lately. Is the activity subject to section 3? And this also applies to CV activities. So if that answer is yes, you have to answer it. You have to change the little radio button to yes. If it's no, then you leave it as no, or you answer it as no. I'm sorry, you have to answer one or the other. And if you're not sure, check with the new section 3 regulations. That will help you determine if this activity is subject to section 3. But you must answer that question before you can finish setting up your first main activity page. So now I'm going to turn it over to Laura.
Yep. Yeah, and I'll add that we're not going into the section 3 regs, but it is live and current right now with the new regs. So if you haven't noticed that was a change, other than the fact that it is appearing as a question in IDIS, go to HUD Exchange right away after this presentation, and then after the CAPER presentation, and check that out. So when you're setting up an activity, right, there's the matrix code that you'll select, as well as the national objectives. And the national objectives are what you're selecting, of course, to make sure that everything is CDBG eligible, which of course CDBG-CV still has to be CDBG eligible. And for everything that's not admin and planning, you have to have this documented, right? And this is the part that HUD cares about, really, to make sure that on your very first step, when you're setting up your activities, that it does fall under one of the objectives like LMI, LMA, urgent need. There has been a lot more great use of urgent need for CV, both because of the waiver and just because of the situation with what was going on. And so there is, I know a lot of, quite a few more grantees that are using this as opposed to, you know, LMA or something where you may use that quite a bit more. This helps determine what data you're collecting, right? Whether it's LMI certification data for households or individuals, or the census tract data for LMA. And this is one where going to the Appendix B of IDIS means that you can go through and make sure that the matrix code and the national objective line up, that they're ones that you're even allowed to combine. And so that's one that, right, before you're even necessarily signing a contract or making, getting the activity going, you want to make sure that this is something that's eligible. And then when you're setting it up in IDIS, it can be important just to make sure you're even getting the details with the right kind of codes that would go into IDIS. And so again, Appendix B in the Entitlement Communities Training Manual will give you that entire chart. Oops. There we go. Right. And so when you go to Appendix C, then you'll get everything together, the matrix code, the national objective, and the accomplishment type. And this is worth noting because quite a few grantees will get some part of this out of order, and then when it comes to putting in their accomplishments at the end, you're kind of stuck because you hadn't either been counting the right things or you just don't know how to put in the data for what happened. And I think it's kind of important to note that if you're looking, say, at this very first one, acquisition of real property, maybe it's an LMA objective, right? Your accomplishment type might be people, businesses, or public facilities, even though what you're qualifying it with is the area, right? So there's the qualifications, and then there's also what you're counting at the very end. And so Appendix C is your friend. Download this one, hang it on your wall. This is what you really want to have when you're setting up any activity really in IDIS. Right? And so once you get this basic information started on your CDBG main page, right, you will be setting up all the activity details. And one of those to think about when we're talking about national objectives is the overall benefit test. And CDBG-CV also has the overall benefit test, which you can think of as the 70% LMI test. And you're making sure that that all of the funds are being used, right, for LMI individuals, or that 70% are. But with CDBG, it's the total CV grant that's being considered on its own. And so compared with normal CDBG, that might be over a program year or 3 years. CV is completely separated for that calculation. And so it's a rolling total. It's just that for CV, that 70% has to be used for LMI individuals. And again, that's not in combination with anything else. And that it's not a program year calculation as well. Something also important to note is that a lot of grantees, I know when, especially when COVID was early, when we talked about using urgent need, sometimes we'd use urgent need for quite a few activities. It was easier for sometimes the paperwork or getting activities qualified. But just remember that either spotlight or urgent need don't count towards that 70% overall benefit. And so this is one that when we talk about the reports, right, the PR26 reports that can show these calculations, this is one you want to pay attention to, especially if you're on the low side, but you still have money to spend. Right, that could help you turn a corner if you haven't been paying attention to that. And in terms of the setup for CDBG, there's a couple other notes that we have that are just particularly frequent with CDBG activities. Ones that we've seen grantees run into are the emergency rent or utility assistance activities, some other public services, business activities, especially with grantees that maybe don't often set up small business loans or grant activities, and then public facilities. And so one of the first notes that we have is that because of the waivers, right, the emergency rent assistance was extended from 3 months till 6 months as a maximum amount of time allowable. And that was under 05Q subsistence payments. This is one that I think grantees have had a lot of questions about. This is one that the waiver was specifically about this activity type. So when you have emergency rental assistance activities with CDBG-CV, you want to make sure that they're set up under 05Q. That would also be for utility assistance or anything else normally under 05Q. For public services, our note here is that quite a few grantees will use 05Z as a catch-all for every kind of public service. It's the other, but this is one you really only want to use when nothing else could possibly fit what you are working on. Right? And if you've got multiple types of activities all grouped together, and so you're using 05Z, like we just talked about, you shouldn't be doing that. And so that's a reason why, if you have 2 things together with 05Z, just because they're a different type of activity that you're trying to cover, those should be separated out. And so that way you can choose. One is, senior services and one is food assistance. And so this is one also where you definitely don't want to be combining a whole bunch of your activities together into one big activity. CV will be like normal CDBG where you're not supposed to be doing that. And so if you have this, you can always come to us with the ask a question and find out how do you unwind an issue. But this is one to make sure you look at if you do have quite a few of these, especially because it's much harder for HUD to track and harder to have their data be accurate at the end. For business assistance or the for-profit business funding, there has to be one activity for every business that you're assisting. Example of a grantee that had done it on the right here, right? We know it's not ideal. We wish it could be one activity for everything, but it is regulatory. And so every single separate business that you have has to be set up like this in a separate way. And so that also applies when it's CDBG's entitlement money, but both CV and normally you will have this. And I know this has just popped up though, because again, a lot of grantees that are used to setting up other kinds of activities were first coming into small business assistance newly in the last couple of years because of COVID. And so again, this is a frequent both issue and question that we get through Ask a Question. It's possible to unwind and fix these kind of mistakes with some doing, but if you are still working on them and setting them up now, make sure that you set them up correctly. in terms of what national objective, right, there can be LMJ, there can be LMA. Most of the time, we've seen, especially with COVID, the 18A economic development for-profit assistance groups. That's usually an LMJ activity. So if you're able to be counting the number of jobs created, that's preferable. There are some 18C from micro enterprise qualification as well, and that's also okay. But counting jobs is really HUD's preferred way to do this. And just remembering with LMA, LMA has to do with providing goods and services to an area as opposed to just being in an LMA area for beneficiaries. So double check also that you are even correctly setting up something for LMA, because that's another frequently asked question that we get is which one to use. You want to make sure too that if you are using jobs, that you're recording the actual recorded number as opposed to putting in, you know, 1 and closing out the activity. Really do try to count that. That's important for, you know, the future use of CDBG is showing the real accomplishments with the money. And so make sure that you're using your paperwork and really documenting jobs retained or jobs created. And again, microenterprise for 18C can be either an activity that has direct financial assistance or not. And so that's another one that you could be doing, but again, you would have to be usually income certifying the small business owner. And our last note on some of the activities would be public facilities. And this is one also where, like business, you don't want to be grouping a bunch of public facilities together in one activity. So you want one, you know, one address, one setup for the one facility, one national objective, matrix code. And so you don't want to have that all grouped together, even if they're similar types of activities. And just a note on broadband, this can be something to look for both with CV or just CDBG coming up, where this could be under a public service, it could be a facility, you can have it in a renovation, right? There's no one broadband matrix code, at least at this time. And so you want to make sure that you are setting up anything with broadband under the appropriate matrix code as well. And Susan, you'll have to cut me off when it's your turn because with my view right now, I'm not seeing when you'll want to talk. But again, with activity funding, we talked about this a little bit ago, right? If you want to have access to the MW or UW, the CARES Act funding, right? You first have to make sure that you answer yes to the, is this to prepare, prevent COVID? Otherwise, you won't have access to this funding line when it comes to activities. And most of you probably figured that out already, but if not, this is why it may not appear for you. And right, like every other time you're funding an activity, this is under the funding drawdown tab, right? And you're doing the add, edit action. And again, you'll have access to both EN money, both the CARES Act and normal CDBG, as well as program income if you have any. And it is okay to mix these funding amounts, right? If you add 2019 or 20 CDBG into it, if it's a public service, right, that will let it be exempt. But this is one where, right, it is okay to be mixing, or even to have something that responds to coronavirus, you know, and you want to be either spending down some extra CDBG money, you've already used your CARES Act, right? Keep marking whether or not something is in response to coronavirus, even if you're not going to the CARES Act funding anymore. It's still worth having that separated out for data so that you know, especially in the future, which ones were for coronavirus and which ones weren't. So something that we've gotten quite a bit of as questions will be what happens when I made a voucher and I used the wrong grant. In this case, right, there are procedures where you can do a voucher revision, or sometimes if there's no money left and it doesn't work out, you'll be returning funds to the Treasury. If you're in the case where you're returning funds to the Treasury, right, you have perhaps no other money that works out that you can do a voucher revision, talk to your HUD field rep first. There's a couple different ways that you can do this. And so to make sure that you get it right, talk to them first, just to make sure that you know how to wire the money over and which accounts you're going to be using, right? And you're not losing the money, of course, forever. You'll get it back, sometimes through activity 2 or line of credit. But right, you're not throwing it out the window. They're just categorizing it, undoing the transaction, and then you'll get the money back, and you can do the drawdown as you intended, and use the other money that's returned for something else that uses that funding type. And voucher revisions are also detailed in the entitlement community manual. So if you are doing a voucher revision, though, the very first thing you want to see, if that's possible, is that, right, you're only switching, right, or forwarding money from one grant type to the same grant type, which would be the same year, right, same CDBG, and that fund type, EN. So if you have 2018 CDBG and you wish it had come from 2020 CDBG-CV, right, that won't line up, or even 2020 regular CDBG and 2020 CV. They're separate accounts, and so they won't mix. You can't say that one really came from the other as a voucher revision. And so in those types of areas, right, it's not necessarily a swap, but you have to find something else that needs a draw or needed a draw of at least the amount that you're looking to revise. And so this is one where, yeah, again, also if you're not having luck doing this on your own and can't figure it out, this is another one where ask a question can be useful before you start trying things live, which can sometimes make things worse. But right, usually voucher revisions are only possible when you still have money to draw from the grant that you're looking at. And so, and also if you're not having a successful voucher revision, this is the first thing to check as well. Am I trying to switch apples to apples to borrow that? And again, if it's not possible, the money just isn't there for you to do the switch, it's not the end of the world. You'll have to just do, right, the return and get the money back that way. And the link will be both on this page and at the end of the resources for the instructions to return funds to the line of credit. Again, you want to make sure you talk to your HUD rep first, but once they tell you, you can follow the instructions that are on this memo. Okay. And so in the end, once everything is set up, right, you've made your drawdowns, you get to the accomplishments. This is a place to remind everybody that CDBG-CV has accomplishments like everything else with CDBG, which means you ideally want to be entering everything quarterly if you can, but annual is also okay. But you do have to make sure that you have at least some accomplishments entered annually and not any longer than that. Right? And so that's where getting your national objective and matrix code, your accomplishment type at the very beginning is important, right? Because then you know what data you need when you get to your accomplishment screens. We're talking for CDBG and CV of benefits that were during the program year that you're entering the accomplishments for. And you want to make sure that you get all the screens, whether it's 1, 2, 3 screens of accomplishments, and get to the end until you can't save and continue anymore. Right? And so this is another place where HUD is looking at this to make sure that you did meet the national objective. And then in terms of performance, right, how many people did you help, or what kind of area, right, how many businesses. So that's a count as well as the basic minimum of did you meet the threshold of meeting the national objective. Oh, see, I have a note about volume. Yes, I will try to speak up a little bit better here. I'm hoping that helps. It may just be where I am in the Midwest. It is -5. So our hair is a little bit dry right now, but I'm going to try. And okay. So in terms of the accomplishments, right, sometimes if an activity is open for multiple years, you may have accomplishments to enter for, right, 2019, 2020, 2021, right? And that's somewhere on the accomplishment screens you can pull down and make sure that you're entering data in for the program year where the accomplishments happened. And you can keep going and do that as a running total in your accomplishment screens. You want the most direct beneficiary data that you can. Otherwise, this is somewhere where you can also do narrative if needed, if there haven't been countable units. And if you do have blight or urgent need, you still want to make sure you're counting units, even if it's there isn't a lot of data that's being entered, right, for national objective or some of the setup. You still want to make sure that you're counting the actual accomplishments that are happening for this. So there still is something to be entered for those. Woo, okay. And coming in towards the end of my portion right here, right? Accomplishments, specifically for CV, there's a couple things to note. One is for 05Q, you have subsistence payments. You want to make sure that you are entering the right info. And specifically, when this is an LMC activity, the IDIS was set up for persons that you'll see, but you're counting all persons in the household. And this is somewhere that the HUD's directions at first and what's in IDIS didn't seem to line up. And so this is one where, right, when you look at persons in IDIS with LMC, you may have looked at households and the number of people, but you want to make sure you're entering all the people that were helped. And again, even if you have nothing else to count, the activity is running, you want to have some kind of narrative for the program year. All right, Susan, program income.
Yes, thank you, Laura.
Yeah.
And I wanted to mention that we see that a lot of questions are coming in, so we're really happy about that. We'll be getting to our questions towards the end, and I think we'll have plenty of time for them. And I think that Rob is answering some of them in the chat, but we will get to the questions verbally as well. So program income can be generated by CV activities. However, it is specified in the regulations that that program income will become CDBG program income, not CV program income, and it will be entered into IDIS as regular CDBG fund type of program income. So make sure that if any CV activities, CV funded activities generate program income, you want to enter that into IDIS on your receipt as the fund type, your non-CV fund type. In other words, your MC or UC, not the MW, UW, that kind of thing. You can use the activity number on the receipt that generated the program income, even though it's a CV activity. But you just want to make sure that it's receipted as regular CDBG funds. And that does become part of your CDBG program income. So now we're going to get into everyone's favorite report, the PR26. We see here that there is a new CDBG-CV PR26 report specifically for the CV funds. So we're going to look at several parts of this. First of all, there are 5 parts, just like the regular PR26 report. You're going to have your summary of CDBG resources, your summary of CDBG expenditures. Again, this is all CV. You're going to have your low mod benefit test section. You have a public service cap calculation section, and you have a planning and admin cap calculation section. Just note that for a public service cap, you can go over the 15%. This is the CV funds, so that's fine. It's going to measure it and give the percent that you used, regardless if it's over or under 15%, it doesn't matter. And this report is cumulative, so every time you run it, it will update with more expenditures that you've made since the last time you ran the report. There are instructions on the HUD Exchange. Just like we have for the regular PR26 report, we also have instructions for the CDBG-CV PR26 financial summary report. And so this is just a screenshot to show you that's available on the HUD Exchange. As you know, when you go into IDIS, and normally on the regular PR26, you have to go into your reports. When you first click on reports, you'll see your parameters section for these reports, PR26, PR28, PR84. And for the regular PR26, you have to go in here to add your new year and to enter your line 1. However, we're going to show you in a few screens, the CDBG-CV report is very simple, and you may not have to actually go into this at all in the edit parameters, but we're going to show you what that looks like. So this is where you would go to click Add Edit. And if you did need to edit lines 10 or 11 on this report, this is where you can enter that information and save it. But many of you may not have to enter anything in lines 10 or 11. And if that's the case, you won't have to go into your edit parameters section at all. You can just simply run your PR26 CDBG-CV in your Microstrategy reports. This is the screenshot of the reports. When you go into IDIS reports and you click open up your Microstrategy reports, so this is what it looks like. And here we've listed some reports that can be helpful in reconciling everything for your PR26 report. These are actually helpful for the regular PR26 as well. The PR05 report is a drawdown report by project and activity. Now for regular CDBG, it's going to show you all the draws for those projects and activities that were done to date. So that's not always as helpful for your regular PR26, but for your CV PR26, if you run it for CV, that'll give you your cumulative spending by activity and will be helpful to look at the report. Also, the PR07 report is the drawdown report by voucher number. And that one will tell you all of your draws done to date or within a specific date period if you select that. And that can also be helpful to compare to your PR26 report. And the PR26 activity summary by selected grant report can also be helpful. And Laura's going to talk about that a little bit later. Here's the section. If you click on your PR26 folder, then you'll see 3 versions of the PR26 report. The one at the top left is your regular PR26 CDBG financial summary report. To the right of that is the PR26 CDBG-CV financial summary report. And below that is the PR26 CDBG activity summary by selected grant report, which is very different than the first 2. Here we can see a snapshot. We're going to show you several different snapshots of this report. This is the PR26 CDBG-CV financial summary. It has the sections part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4, and part 5, just like we mentioned before. And now we're going to focus on different sections of the report. This is after you see the first page of the report, you'll have your detailed section, just like the regular PR26. Here's your line 19 detail, which is all of your planning and administration funds. You'll notice the lines are different numbers than the regular PR26 report. And so on your line 19 detail, this is an example showing all of the draws that were made towards planning and admin costs. Then you have, and also this is showing the highlighted section of the report, where part 5, where it's showing the amount dispersed for planning and administration. Next, we're going to see, this is the line 12 detail, which is all the activities, expenditures that went towards low, moderate income. And so this is the detail of line 12. This is showing you all the expenditures that were made that go into the low mod benefit 70% minimum. And now we see the section of the report that is the low mod benefit section of the report that explains how much has been expended for low mod benefit. And you can see here in this example, it's just over the 70% minimum. Now, of course, this is going to, as we mentioned earlier, this report keeps updating as you keep spending your money. So you may see this, these numbers are going to change as you run the report. As you do more expenditures, you will see these numbers update. This is the section that talks about public services. And it will show you here in this example, 44.76% of the funds have been dispersed for public service activities. That's perfectly okay, because as we know with CDBG-CV, any percent that you would like to spend on public services is okay. Now, one thing we want to remind you about is the CDBG-CV expenditure rule. And so one thing is that 80% of your CDBG-CV funds must be drawn by the end of the 3 years. Now, how do you calculate that? You can look on the grant page, and if you view your CDBG-CV grant, you will see on there the obligation date. That is the date that the grant agreements were signed, and they put that date into the system, and that makes it an easy way to see what the obligation date was. So you just simply add 3 years to that date, or I guess, was figured out 1,095 days. I hope that's right. But if you're really counting, that's how many days you have to spend at least 80% of your grant. When you look at your PR26 report, again, as we mentioned, it's cumulative, it's updating. And here's the section, your summary of all your expenditures. That's your regular project plan expenditures, and then your planning and admin expenditures. So this gives you the total expenditures on line 8. And then on line 9 is your unexpended balance. And that also is a way to see how you're doing on your expenditures. And now I'm going to turn it back over to Laura.
Okay, after my reviving water here, I think I can speak a little better. And so, like Susan mentioned, the bonus report for you is the PR26 activity summary by selected grant. That's what you usually will run if you are checking usually the test 2 of your admin cap, right? It's just going to give you the information for 1 year's grant, but it also will work for CDBG-CV as the 1 grant that you're putting in. So this is another way that you can go in and show expenditures for CV if you're looking for another way to check something against your PR07, or you're trying to solve a mystery of some numbers not lining up. Just a few report hints for anyone that's not as familiar with running reports in IDIS. One of the main things is that you want to be able to export to either PDF or Excel. Both are possible. And just remember, if you need to, when you export to Excel, then you can use all of the functionality of Excel to hide columns, sort, and find things. So that can be a good way to be using your reports if you don't do that already. There's a technical guide for the IDIS reports. That's a user guide that's available on the HUD Exchange, and we have the link for you both here and at the end. This will let you know what the report is measuring, what kind of grantees should be running it, and what data is in it. There's also a set of frequently asked questions on the HUD Exchange for reports that we have the link to. So this is another place, like all the FAQs, and there's a lot of different subjects that's worth looking through, either when you have a question and searching, or just looking through this. Sometime it can be an educational way to look through some of the common sticking points that grantees have. With CDBG-CV, reports should now function where you can separate and select just CDBG-CV as your funding type. So you're running the report for that, right? Oops, and it's not letting me go back. There we go. Right, there's other places where the report near the end will just have you do either formula grants, right, or not, and so you can run the report for either just formula grants or not. So be looking for how the report is set up to make sure that you're either leaving out CV if you're trying to running it for only CV, or something where you're running it for both of them. And to touch on the CDBG-CV cash on hand, right? This is a report that's available on the grant tab in the lower left-hand corner. This is one that grantees have had for a while for CDBG entitlement funds, but now there's a separate form just for CV. However, right, you access this, right, once you click on the Add Edit, you'll get your list of reports that still need to be turned in. Hopefully you just have the top one, but you may have a couple that need to be turned in. this is where to check to make sure that you have them. And there is an instruction manual specifically for the CV cash on hand report. The link will be here, and I think at the end as well, but this is the important document that you want to have before you start off if you're not sure how to run this report, and especially worth looking at to see if there's any differences in how you would usually run this compared to the CV. Right. And one big thing to note is CDBG and CV, right? There wasn't a way for us to select and choose from one of them before. They're both on the same report technically. And so you can be filling out on the left-hand column the normal CDBG cash on hand. And on that right-hand column is the CV, right? Not as much that you need to total, no program income, no revolving loan funds for CV. So that's the good news. And this is one that if you need to, you can say that you have all your CDBG information in, but you still need to finish CV. You can turn it in and then go back and edit and fill in the other form. It's also just perfectly okay, and maybe a good idea to fill them both out and turn them in. But if you do need to, it is possible to do just one or the other and then come back. Right? And so that would be that certify and submit versus save. Right? So you may hit the certify and submit if you do need to turn in just one of either of the grant types. Right? And when you go to the instructions, if this isn't something you use typically, right, there's the instructions about what each line represent and the instructions for it. There are a couple lines here that are system populated. And so these are ones every once in a while that people can't figure out why the totals aren't changing. But again, they are just there as reference, and your information is the important one that you're putting in. But there are a few lines here where it's okay that you can't move them. Right. And so when we look at, so let me go back. Right, with cash on hand, the main ones, right? When you follow the instructions, you have your EN and LA funds, if any have had to be returned to you through your local account at the beginning of the reporting period, the amount received from drawdowns, and the amount of the local program account. For CV, you may very well not have any. Right? The amount that was dispersed is line 4. And so, again, these are your vouchers, cash or checks, and the cumulative amount of the local account funds dispersed. And again, number 6, IDIS auto-calculated. It's fine that this number doesn't update or that you can't change it. And again, the important thing is to go through and make sure that you have your instructions going through. One reminder is that if funds have been paid out of your general funds through your city or county government, these aren't necessarily these are not the CDBG cash disbursements for the cash on hand report. This is a frequent question and issue from grantees. So this is one that I know for cash on hand, it's perfectly okay to have 0 cash on hand and have everything balanced in your reporting period for the quarter. And when you want to go at the end and actually print your cash on hand, right, that'll be at the CDBG-CV cash on hand separate report that you can run now in the PR29 area of MicroStrategy. We're down to our resources. Oh, that means it's about to be question time, and I've heard there are quite a few questions coming in.
That there are. Yeah, thank you, everyone. We'll get to some of these. There's definitely some overlap, and we're really trying to pick the most generally useful questions that can be answered most generally. Again, I think I posted an announcement in there. If you submit your question to us through HUD Exchange IDIS Ask a Question, we can reach out to you and discuss the particulars and even take a peek to see what's going on in IDIS and really give you the best help possible. And I see questions are just coming in. And Laura and Susan, do you want to kind of dive through the list of questions here, and I'll just start marking them off as answered?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll get started, and then Laura and I will kind of go take turns.
Sure.
But I'll start with a few, give Laura's voice a break a little bit.
Thank you.
In her very cold climate, since I have a warmer climate. So one question was, how often should accomplishments be entered into IDIS? And so I know that HUD would really like it if grantees would submit accomplishments or enter accomplishments quarterly, but we know that's not always possible. But at a minimum, you must enter accomplishments once a year. And even if it's maybe a public facility that's not finished, so you can't really say that there's an actual public facility built or rehabbed or something like that, you can at a minimum put a narrative in there. But yeah, we do, we recommend quarterly, but if not, if you can't do that, at least once a year, and particularly right before you do your caper, so that all of your information is in there for your caper. A couple other things that have been asked in some form or another. Some people have asked about action plan amendments. They're saying, well, if your CV funds were in your 19 action plan, should we go back to amend that if we have changes with our CV funds? And yes, the answer is yes. But we will be talking about amendments to action plans and the caper and reporting much more in the next session. So if you're interested in that information, we will be talking much more about that in the following session. Now, if you have, say next year, this year or next year, you're doing regular CDBG funded activities, but they're in response to coronavirus, but they're not using CV funds, those can be in your regular action plan. Those don't have to go back to your CV amendment, but I'm talking about specifically when it's funded with CV funds and you're doing an amendment. Yes, you should go back to the original action plan that was amended for CV. Just going to take a look here and see what else. I know that someone had asked about the IDIS access, getting access, and I believe that Rob answered that in the Q&A panel. And just want to take a look here and see. We have lots of, we gave you the resources page earlier. We might be able to go back to that maybe and just show you there's lots of resources available on the HUD Exchange for different information that you may need.
Okay.
Do you have some, Laura?
I'm just looking. I'm trying to interpret our question sheet right here. One was to repeat the obligation date. Did we get that? The 3
Oh,
years.
yes.
Mentioned that. I pointed that to the financial management quick guide. Yep.
And again, it's you have 3 years from your obligation date, or I guess 1,095, didn't memorize it, days. So it's counted in days, not necessarily jumping program years or things like that. So it's more fine-tuned than just thinking in years or months.
And of course, that's for 80% of your funds. You actually have 6 years to spend 100% of your funds, but hopefully not everyone will be taking that long.
Ooh. There's a fun question here, which is that the matrix and appendices that are provided, especially C, we were providing the entitlement grantee manual, but there is also the states manual. So apologies, states, for leaving you out here. And they want to know, why are some of the accomplishment types and matrix codes different between the state manual and the entitlement manual? I don't know this answer. Do any of our other experts on the call know why, say, the matrix codes might be different between the two manuals?
This opening can answer that. Back then, when we create the matrix code and national objective and accomplishment type combination, states requirements are slightly different. So that's why sometimes for entitlement, those accomplishment type is reasonable, but for the state, because state money, like most of their service area in rural area, sometimes it's impossible for them to collect those data. So that's why.
Okay, so they may be different because of that very early law difference and because of their geography having that rural component. So I guess if you're sitting around on a Friday night comparing CDBG activities with your friends that also do community development, don't just refer to the matrix code and the amazing 3A activity that you've set up. You want to specifically mention what activity matrix code that might be, because they might vary.
Right, matrix code doesn't have difference. It's the combination of matrix code and national objective and accomplishment.
Gotcha. Okay, so they will be able to.
Eligible activity, we use matrix code to identify eligible activity. So for individual eligible activity, states and entitlement are using the same matrix code, identifying same type of activities.
Gotcha. So it is just the combination, not necessarily.
Just combination of, well, mainly it's accomplishment type.
Gotcha. Great.
Yeah.
So they can compare at least O3A to O3A on their downtime, but it may still not be set up exactly the same way and have the same data collection.
Yeah.
I understand. Good question, and something I hadn't spotted before. So thank you.
Yeah, only very few.
Yeah.
Few matrix code as different accomplishment type.
Let's see. Susan, do you want to?
So if I can jump in, I'm going to answer a few. Is that okay, Laura?
Absolutely. Please do.
You're going to look while you were. So a couple more questions. Are we supposed to submit both PR26 reports for the 2021 CAPER? So now that you have finished at least a year and that we have the PR26 for CV, yes, you are supposed to be submitting both a PR26 regular CDBG and a PR26 CV. However, we do know, as we learned earlier, the PR26 CV will be updating as you do more expenditures. So the version that you submit with your CAPER now is going to be different than a few months from now and next year. So your HUD office will probably like to see that every year with your CAPER until you've completely expended all of your CV funds. There's also a question, is there an IDIS report which shows voucher revisions? There's a couple different versions of the PR07 report. And so you will see revisions on a couple different versions of those. You can try those out and see what works for you. Some of them have, one version has a date range, another one does not, but even if you don't have a date range, you can also always download it into Excel and filter out the sections that you don't.
Yeah, Susan, are you thinking of like the PR05 or 07 and running the PR07 not for just the completed vouchers necessarily, but there is the option to run but for all vouchers between a certain period and find out, right, if there are any open, revised, all the information about their status. And I believe for PR05 that's possible too. And you can select just one status if you want to in the, at least for the PR07 when you're setting it up, if you just want to see revised. I think for if you're problem solving or looking at things, it sometimes can help to look at a whole bunch of them and then sort so that you can see if there's one that you were mistaken about or where the money went. If there's something still open, you can look at it that way. Susan, do you remember on 05, can you get all of the statuses too, or just revised and completed?
No, I think the PR05 just shows completed vouchers. So you would want to use the PR07. Okay. Yeah, thank you for that. There's also a question here about program income. It says, if I'm adding program income from CDBG-CV to regular CDBG, do I have to do separate receipts for CDBG-CV and regular CDBG, or can they be combined? So want to mention that when you do a receipt, you are going to enter the activity number of the activity that generated the program income. And so if you have money that was generated, program income that was generated from a CV activity, you would enter that activity number. If it was a regular CDBG activity, you would enter that activity number. So you don't really want to combine them on the same receipt. Now, sometimes you can combine activity if all the activities were the same matrix code, like a housing rehab program, 14A, and you have receipts every month that are from those activities. You can sometimes combine those into one receipt, but we would recommend with the CV activities that are generating regular program income to enter those separately so that it's clear that that came from a CV activity, even though it was receipted as regular CDBG. Puping, I don't know if you want to say anything else on that, or does that sound good to you?
It sounds good to me. Yes, we do want you to enter CV program income separately, as Susan explained, because they are associated to the different.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Susan.
Okay.
There's one question I think either of us could answer, which is, can you do voucher revisions to correct errors for admin and planning? And Susan, you want to answer that one?
Sure, yeah. So admin and planning vouchers can be revised just like regular vouchers. Now, one thing that can complicate that is if you're using the AD subfund, which is optional, and not that many grantees use the AD subfund for CDBG. But if you do use that, that makes voucher revisions much more complicated because you can't revise a voucher that's AD to EN to an EN funded activity. But assuming that you're using EN funds for your planning and admin activities, if you made a mistake and something has to be, a voucher has to be revised to another activity, again, as long as the fund type and the year and is the same, you'll be able to do that revision.
Or you can use the other option, which is returning a certain amount of funds if you went over, and then that money will come back to you and you can use it for something else. And something to watch though, when you're moving money around, is just to remember there's both, this is more for the EN money, but there are both of the caps, right? There's the program year and the grant test, right? Each kind of PR26, both the program year and by selected grant. And both of them have to meet the 20% threshold. And so just keep that in mind if you start thinking about moving money around. If you start moving either program years or things like that. You don't want to accidentally pull some money from a different program year accidentally into, say, the current one and go over. So definitely possible. It's just that you want to be extra careful moving those funds around.
Right. Here's a question that actually is commonly asked, and they're asking that they're mentioning that on line 19 detail that they see that there's a non-admin activity listed on their PR26 report, and they don't understand why it's showing under admin. And so the key to this PR26 report, both for regular CDBG and CV, is the matrix code of the activity. So if the activity has a planning and admin matrix code, it's going to automatically, the draws from that activity will automatically be classified as planning and admin. If it's a non-planning and admin matrix code, it will be reflected otherwise as a regular project cost. So if you see an activity that's not admin, but it's showing up on your PR26 as an admin drawdown, then check your activity setup and make sure that the correct matrix code has been selected. And if it hasn't been selected correctly, you can update that and correct it. And then you just will need to wait a day overnight for the Microstrategy reports to refresh. And then you can rerun your PR26 and it should automatically correct and reclassify that expense to the new matrix code category. There was also a question about the PR26 CV not accurately reflecting repayments or return funds. And I do know that that was an issue, and it's being corrected. I thought maybe it was corrected with the last release, but that perhaps maybe going into the next IDIS release, which I believe is going to be March or April. So if you see that your PR26 report is not showing your return funds correctly, or it's not updating your unexpended balance correctly, just know that that was an issue that has been identified and will be corrected. But again, you can always submit and ask a question. If you see something strange about your report, and let us know, and then we can work with you on that.
One general question is, what's the difference between IDIS and DRGR? Quite a lot is the difference. Right, IDIS is your CPD funding. Rob, I don't know if you want to mention the things that are on DRGR, but there aren't a lot of places where the two overlap. It just depends on your access.
Yeah, no, there really are none. They DRGR is the disaster grant reporting system. It was also used for NSP, another few miscellaneous grants bouncing around in there, but it's mainly used for the disaster grants, CDBG-DR, to get that money out quickly. It's a different setup in terms of the reporting expectations and how information is gathered. And it offers a lot of, it's a different platform because it offers a lot more flexibility than IDIS, which has a lot more built-in logic and structure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I don't think you'll ever be asked to move money between systems, or, unless you put information in the wrong system, transferring anything between them. They're their own countries of data systems. That's the most general answer that we have. If there's something specific, that you're looking for in one system versus the other, they might be there. There's also a separate DRGR, ask a question. So if you could turn one into IDIS, but you can also ask specifically for DRGR as well as HEROES.
I'll go ahead and answer this one. I think this will be a relief to maybe a lot of people. There a couple questions came in asking about rental and mortgage assistance programs, thinking that they have to have a separate activity for each household assisted. And no, you do not need a separate activity for each household for rent and mortgage assistance under O5Q. So that's might be a relief to a lot of folks. You can do multiple households and in those activities. But
Finally have some good news.
Yes, finally some good news. But yes, we did point out earlier that the businesses and the public facilities do need to be separate. And that's true for regular CDBG as well.
Let's see. Here's a good one. Do states have to do the cash on hand report?
And I think the answer to that is no. We can confirm with Puping, but I believe that states are exempt from doing the cash on hand report.
Yeah, this sounds like one I know the answer to, but it would be great to have HUD say it as well.
Yeah, correct. States are not required to submit cash on hand report, as cash on hand report are really a part of the SF 425 form, and states are exempt from SF 425.
Thank you. Okay.
More good news for states, at least. One less report you have to do. So there's a question here about looking at PR26 and looking at the line 19 detail, which I think is the CV version, looking at admin. And the person is saying that there's a non-admin activity listed under there, but it was funded with EN funds. That's one where it's, oh, it looks like, Susan, you did answer this, and I may not have heard the answer. Is that one that we answered?
Yes, yes.
Verbally, and I just was reading other questions.
Yep, I think that might be. But yeah, we can just reemphasize that the matrix code of the activity will determine what category is going to the expenditures are going to show up on the PR26 report.
Yep, I was reading while you said that. Here's a question: is the timeliness ratio calculated with CV funds and regular year funds? So it's just on a grant basis for CV with how much you're spending in terms of expenditures. It's something where it kind of doesn't matter if they're grouped or not. I don't know if there's any other specific information we'd have.
Okay,
Yeah.
Laura, let me take this question.
Yeah.
So timeliness ratio for the CDBG have special meaning. So for the timeliness ratio, that's not applied to the CV funds. CV funds are excluded from timeliness ratio calculation. So hope that's answer your question. And then the 80% of expenditure deadline, that's 3 years, 80% of funds have to be expended. That's only applied to the CDBG-CV. So
okay, thank you.
I see. I think I see what you're saying. That, yeah, when you get to your grant, the 1.5 times the grant that you want to have spent down,
right,
that one won't.
That one for the 1.5 times of your regular CDBG funds, CV are excluded.
Yeah. So it doesn't matter then. It's just going to calculate no matter what activities they're in, right? It's just seeing what you've spent versus what you have, correct?
Correct. Only based on the regular formula CDBG funds, program income, and revolving funds.
Okay, thank you. Here's a question. What if you're providing emergency rental assistance and housing counseling to the same households? Do you need to set those up as two separate activities? Yes, that would be correct. That if you're having a rental assistance activity and then you're also doing a separate program where you're doing housing counseling, then that would be 2 separate activities. Now, if you were doing housing counseling as a very minimal part of a emergency rental program, that may be possible to combine it. But in general, if you have separate activities or separate programs with separate matrix codes, in general, you're going to have separate activities.
Yeah, because rental is not usually, other than the up to 3-month emergency, CDBG really doesn't think about rental assistance like home TBRA. So
Right.
It's not set up with some of the housing codes like you have for home rehab and things like that, where counseling could be potentially combined. Let's see.
Someone was asking about that maybe something was entered, an activity was put into the system under the wrong project. And that's actually a very easy fix. If you find that you had an activity set up under the incorrect project, you can simply go to the activity, edit it, and select change project. Then you can search for the correct project and save that, and it will move that activity to the correct project. And even if you've already done draws, all the draws, everything will, those are all stay with the activity, but then it will put everything under the correct project. So if you find that you did have activities under the incorrect project, that's a very simple way to fix.
One question is on 05Q, again, because it's nice and complicated. The question is, do you enter the number of households or the number of people? And Pupeng, correct me if I'm wrong, but you want the number of people to be entered, even though you were also collecting household data.
Right. Although the grantee may qualify the applicant based on household income, but really when you report beneficiary, because you use limited clientele, so you count all the persons within household as number of persons benefited. So for example, if one household has 3 people, when you report accomplishments, you enter 3 as accomplishments, number of persons assisted.
Okay, thank you.
I see a question is asking about making a correction that maybe someone set up the businesses combined. So instead of setting up a separate activity, they set up one activity for, say, 10 businesses, and now they realize they have to do those separately. That can be fixed, and actually fixing that is easier if you haven't spent all your money yet. So the way that can be fixed is that you set up the additional activities. So if there were 10, then you would set up 9 new activities, and then you would do voucher revisions to move the vouchers, the drawn amount to each activity where it belongs. And as long as you have funds that are still not spent in your grant, you can fund the activity where you're revising the voucher to make sure that you can move that voucher over to that activity, or that portion of the voucher over to that activity. So that's something that can be fixed, and the sooner the better when it comes to fixing those kinds of things. But you can also send in and ask a question, and we can give you specific directions on how to do that.
Someone said, again, the PR26 report does not calculate CV funds. And I don't know if this was part of a question or not, but that is correct, right? Because PR56 is timeliness, and like we were just saying, CV is not part of that. So it's only going to be looking at your regular entitlement funds. So whoever is asking that, you're right, and there's no problem, but that information is not coming up into that report. Ooh. Here's a question that's slightly different, talking about the warnings and flags that come up for CDBG, because there's ones for 60% spent or 80% with no accomplishments. The flags or the warnings in IDIS, when they're the green circle, right, there's just warnings that a flag may happen coming up and that you are on the right, you're on the path to having a flag if something doesn't change. And right, when you have an actual flag, that's when you put in a remediation plan and enter it. The flags are auto-generated based on these different markers, and they're more of a monitoring tool for your HUD rep, especially if you reach the point where it's been a year with no accomplishments. Sometimes the remediation report is that you're going to be entering the accomplishments in 5 more days, and right, your HUD rep will probably approve that. With CDBG, the flags do not prevent you from any transactions, from completing the activity, from making, entering accomplishments or doing anything like that. Unlike some of the home flags, which might actually be stops where you can't do other transactions. With CDBG, therefore, really for your HUD field office to look and see if there are any problems going on, those can be an indicator of that. But sometimes you just need to enter a remediation plan if you get to the point of having the true actual flag. If you have the little green circles, right, unless you can look and see if there is something that you need to act on. If not, there's nothing that you need to do at that point. I'm hoping I answered what the person was looking for. Susan, anything else to add on the CDBG side?
I can add to that. So all Laura said are correct. And also the person who raised this question maybe want to ask whether CDBG-CV activities are excluded from being flagged. The answer is no. The CV activities are also subject to at-risk flag if the activity meet one of these 3 criteria, which is no draws for 1 year, 80% funds drawn with no accomplishment, or 3 years no accomplishment. So CV activities are also subject to the at-risk flag.
Thank you, Puping. And again, it really just depends on if there's a problem, and if not, the remediation plan can say that. And if there is a problem, you'll talk about what you're doing to remediate it, to move forward. And that's something that your field office can talk about too, because CV, I'm sure, is just as likely to have any of the problems with the activities as normal CDBG. And so again, they serve the same purpose.
Okay, thank you, Laura. Here's a pretty simple question. They're asking about their access in IDIS, that they don't see the cash on hand option available. And so people that have drawdown privileges, either creating or proving drawdowns, are the ones that have the access to the cash on hand report, or the cash on hand submission, I should say. Administrators may also see that, I'm not sure, but definitely if you have drawdown privileges, you should see that, unless of course you're a state, which means you don't have that option at all.
And like we mentioned at the very beginning, if you don't have those privileges but need them, right, your local grantee administrator is the one who can grant those to you. And hopefully this is the PR30 that you can run to check and see what within your entitlement jurisdiction who has what privileges for what programs, who's active, who's not. So right, the PR30 is always a good management tool. And on the PR30, there'll be a little key. It'll have, I think it's column G, but you'll be able to see who is the grant administrator if you're not sure. And you definitely want to have one. Don't, if you're, if somebody's account is expired or somebody that was the department head has moved on, you want to make sure that you have at least one grantee administrator, especially for times where, you know, if you have to make a draw in one day and somebody else lost their access and you need to move things around, right? You need to be able to make those kind of changes, and it can limit your limit yourself in IDIS if you don't have that ability. So running a PR30 can be important just to make sure you keep tabs on who has those privileges and make sure that you do have somebody that can assign or revoke other privileges locally without having to go through the IDIS online full form and going to your field office.
Okay, here's a question about, will IDIS give me an error message if a revision is made incorrectly or it can't be made? And yes, if you're revising a voucher and it doesn't work, you know, it won't allow you to do that revision, you will get an error message. And it should show at the top that it might say that the activity that you're trying to revise the voucher to doesn't have the right funds or the amount of funds that are needed. So if it does go through, if the voucher revision does work, you will see that the voucher has a new line or two new lines, perhaps, if there's still money remaining on the voucher, and the original line then becomes revised, and that's just for historical purposes. It no longer applies to the funding, and then you will see the new completed lines where the funds are showing under the new activity. And if there's remaining money on that original voucher, you'll see a new line for the remaining funds. Voucher revisions are one of the most common questions that we get on the IDIS Ask a Question, and partly because it is kind of complicated, especially if you're trying to revise vouchers and the years and the fund types don't line up. And so we do encourage you to submit and ask a question if you have a specific situation and it's not working for you, and we can give you the guidance on how you can fix it. But sometimes you will have to return funds to the line of credit to make the correction, unfortunately. And again, as Laura mentioned earlier in the presentation, when you return funds because you drew money from, say, an incorrect source or an incorrect activity, and you have to return it because you can't do it through a voucher revision, those funds will come back to you. You're not losing them forever. They'll come back as a credit in activity 2, a credit voucher that can be then applied to the activity where it originally was drawn from, and then it will release those funds for you to use it in the correct activity.
Found a question that I liked, which is, are there accomplishments needed under activity delivery costs? And the answer is yes. A lot of times, if you are putting your activity delivery costs as part of the activity itself, then the accomplishments will all be together. If they are separate, say it's for like housing program delivery, there is a place on IDIS in the activity setup where you can have your accomplishments linked to another activity. And so sometimes if you truly have accomplishments in the other activities and the delivery cost separate, you can link then to those other activities. And so that way those accomplishments count and they're linked together. I don't know of any other, I can't think of one other than housing where that would apply, but I guess Susan or Pupin, can you think of anything other than housing?
Well, oh, go ahead, Tiffany.
Am I forgetting something?
Okay. Housing rehab is the only type of activity that have activity delivery cost matrix code, which is 14H. We have set up activity rules. In general, housing rehab is the only activity that allowed to separate actual construction activity with housing rehab admin costs. All the other activities, the activity delivery cost should be included in the regular activity. So you do not need to set up two activity for construction or an activity delivery. So in other words, yes, your accomplishments reported for that activity will be for both actual cost and activity delivery cost.
Thank you.
Right.
That is, yeah, I couldn't trust my memory at this point. But for everything else, it's all together. And again, this is just CDBG. It also counts for some of the other grants as well in a similar way, but for CDBG, yeah, if you have econ development or something like that, that is all together. Or with econ development, if it's 18A, you want to have those specific delivery costs with each specific loan, the time spent doing each one.
Yeah, and there's some good resources available that talk about this. The only kind of exception would be if you have an activity that the CDBG funds are paying for activity delivery costs, but you're using another source of funds to carry out or to provide the services, then of course you're going to have an activity in the system. It's not going to be set up as activity delivery. It's going to be set up as the matrix code of the activity, but you may be just charging the activity delivery cost to the CDBG program. So that's kind of not as common.
Yeah. Let's see.
There's a question about, does the 70% low mod include public facilities improvements designed for seniors? And yes, if you have a public facility that's serving a presumed benefit population like seniors, then that's going to be low mod clientele and will be part of your 70% or not 70%, but you're part of your calculation of activities that serve low mod, which has to be at least 70%. So looking at some of these are repeats.
Yep, I'm looking for, make sure we cover as much ground as we can.
I do see a quick question about adding the slide deck, and I think that happened in earlier sessions, but our typical process is that once we complete a online training webinar, it has to go through review, including accessibility, Section 508 compliance, and then it gets posted to the HUD Exchange. And so there's a single process and place.
Gotcha. And if they missed it, it will be there eventually.
Yep. Yeah. And make sure you subscribe to the news items that come out of HUD Exchange, because there will be one that includes the availability of resources. New availability of resources, I should say.
I think there's another question about voucher revisions where it's asking, can voucher revisions be used if you've drawn the entire amount of the grant? And unfortunately, if you have drawn all of any particular year's money, or in the case of CV, if you've drawn all your CV funds, you won't be able to do a voucher revision, because doing a voucher revision requires that the activity the funds are moving to must have available funds to move that voucher to it. So in that case, it would have to be fixed by returning the funds, as we discussed earlier.
Ooh, I'm going to pick a question that's slightly different. It's, can you change the year for projects after there've been draws on it? And yes, you sure can. Yeah, there's nothing that will prevent you, as long as the activity is open, from going in and using the project button, the same one when you're doing the setup, from going in and selecting a different project. And then it'll be associated with that project, and then the and if you've changed the year, the other action plan.
Well, I think we've gotten to most of the questions here.
There was one that was really good, that was, are we going to talk about the CAPER and CV? Sure are. I liked that one.
Very soon.
I
Part
swear
2.
that was a real question in here we didn't plan.
Yeah. All right.
It's at what, 4 p.m. Coming up?
It is in half an hour. Yep, at the top of the hour. We will have part 2, talk about the CDBG and the CAPER, what you need to know as CDBG-CV grantee, or someone, or a grantee or grantee using CDBG for coronavirus, prepare, prevent, respond. Did I get that in the right order? What you need to know so you can report that correctly. So thank you, Susan and Laura and the team at Citem Group. Special thanks to our guests from HUD, Pupang Wong. Please again take advantage of the many resources on the HUD Exchange. This presentation transcript recording will go up on the HUD Exchange. Please make use of IDIS Ask a Question. There were lots of questions where we just need a chance to pick up the phone or have an email exchange with you and to see exactly what's going on, so we can answer those effectively. So please make use of that. So again, join us in half an hour at the top of the hour, 4 p.m. Eastern, for part 2. This concludes today's webinar. Thank you.